Today I'm doing an interview with Dada Navanilananda, who is the author of Close Your Eyes and Open Your Mind, which is the textbook that I use in my classes, Make Meditation a Daily Habit.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We're here in by the Catskills Mountains in upstate New York at the Path of Bliss Spiritual Retreat. We're having a nice time, and thanks again for taking a moment to do this interview. So you're a monk of Ananda Marga. Talk a little bit about what Ananda Marga is and your role as a monk.
Sure. So I've been a monk with the Ananda Marga spiritual organization for 37 years or something, so most of my adult life. And Ananda Marga, it means the path of bliss. So hence the retreat, the spiritual retreat we're attending right now is the Path of Bliss spiritual retreat. Ananda Marga is Sanskrit, and it's a philosophy and a spiritual practice, so it's a kind of an extension of an ancient spiritual tradition, but it also describes an organization. And as an organization, we propagate the spiritual practices from this tradition, and we're also a social service and educational mission. So we have a lot of community service projects all over the world, many different countries. And so as a monk and a missionary, so I'm a spiritual teacher and a missionary effectively, and I can be sent anywhere in the world to do the work of Ananda Marga in that place in all sorts of different roles. So my role, given my background and what I've learned over the years, is usually in relation to teaching, and often to do with music, because I grew up playing music. I'm a writer, so it's to do with communications and training people also in teaching. Right.
And when you said that ancient spiritual knowledge, you're talking about Tantra.
So it's the ancient tradition of Tantra yoga, yeah. Not to be confused with the erotic cult. Sometimes audiences find that disappointing, but yeah, it's a very old spiritual tradition.
Yeah, we're clarifying that from the beginning, huh?
Yes.
Okay. What inspired you to write the book, and how does the book set apart from other books on meditation?
So what inspired me to write the book was a friend who actually wrote the very early draft of some of the chapters that are still in the book. So he's a very good friend of mine from years ago, and we're still in touch. And he was and I were both involved in teaching university students meditation in New Zealand, where I come from, and I was visiting, he was stationed there. And we wanted to develop a curriculum for the university students. So that was the kernel or the germ of it. And so he developed this course, and then he wrote a few chapters, and then he didn't really finish it, and then he didn't want to finish it. He asked me to finish writing it. And I was quite reluctant. I said, well, it's your book. And he said, no, you're the right person to do this. And I finally agreed. And he wouldn't even let me put his name in it. So there's an anonymous acknowledgement in the beginning.
It's dedicated. Who is this person?
It's dedicated to an old friend.
Right. Okay.
So there's a very sentimental story behind it, actually, about our friendship that hardly anyone knows.
Oh, okay.
All right. So it's really was his initial inspiration. I added a lot to it. I changed it and I rewrote it, and this is in the third edition now. So it's changed, dramatically since what I started with from him. But that initial idea that we both had of making something that's accessible to, particularly young, smart people, which is pretty much, I hope that describes university students.
Our viewers,
of course, your viewers, yes.
Well, the book has this wonderful humorous tone. So I love the tone in the book.
Yeah, well, that's a reflection of myself and the anonymous original sort of author of the germ of the book. He's one of the funniest people I've ever met. And I write humor. I've written a humor blog for years. I've published a comedy novel. I use humor in my presentations all the time. And I don't think meditation should be boring. I think one of the problems with the perception of meditation these days is people think it's hard or dry or boring or something kind of like exercise, something they have to do. It might be good for them, but it's not fun. And frankly, I would not have continued meditating if it wasn't something I really love, the experience of. It's not just that I love the results. I love meditating.
I asked you, how does it stand apart from other books on meditation? And I think humor is probably one. Sure. And what else? What would you say?
My goal was to create a book that talked about meditation at some depth, as much as you can in what is essentially an introductory book, but without it being too esoteric and inaccessible. So it was this sort of balance between something that's more than just the superficial look at it, but is also easy to understand.
What would you say is the main takeaway for a reader from the book?
I want them to be meditating. I mean, my goal is to get them to actually meditate, and to come away and feel, this is something tremendously valuable for my life, and here I have the tools to start doing this regularly, every day, ideally twice a day. And what I also, at the end of the book, talk about is, okay, what next steps can you take? Because generally people, they might start with something like this, but they need to learn more and meditate with other people, hopefully participate in some sort of meditation group or class like yours, or a retreat like this that we're in the middle of now, so that they can continue their practice.
You ask people to make a personal commitment, what they can do from that point, from where they're at, to make the world a better place. Why is that important?
That's my favorite chapter.
Oh yeah.
I guess I'm allowed to have a favorite chapter of my own book. I really enjoyed writing it because it's about taking this feeling of connecting to the source of love within you, which I think is what meditation is all about. Taking that feeling and expressing it through action and in your life. And I give a number of examples of people who've done that, people I admire, people many of us admire. And then the objective of that is to get people to think, well, okay, what have I got that I can give to others? And in doing that, we find completeness in ourselves. We open up our hearts and we find that we're not alone, and we're put here to express love, and that's through service.
You even ask in the book too, is it selfish to be sitting for meditation while there's so much suffering going on in the world? And I guess that cultivating this inner love and this spiritual growth internally through meditation, the way that that's naturally going to get expressed out into the world is through things like service, right? Which I guess that
hopefully
also...
it happens naturally, but I think we need to do it deliberately. Because I actually think that with the world as it is today, if all you're doing is meditating, I think it is selfish.
Okay.
Unless you're some rare, extraordinary person who can change the world through their spiritual vibes that they're creating, and I don't know anybody like that. So for virtually all of us, I think that there's a need for us personally, in terms of our personal development, and definitely in terms of the world, for us to not just to meditate and cultivate our better qualities, but to use those qualities. That's what they're there for, not just to help us, but to help everybody. So we need this kind of balance. And I think it's critical to both the development of a healthy society and for the development of the individual.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, you're absolutely right. That sense of service, that calling should be deliberate.
Yeah.
No matter what.
It doesn't come, there are people that sit around and just meditate and think I'm praying for people or something like that. Doesn't cut it with me, sorry. I think there needs to be action. If I'm in trouble, I don't want people praying for me. I don't think that's very useful. I want people to, if I'm in trouble, I want people to help me.
In your opinion, what is the state of Tantra now in the States or in the world?
So Tantra is a tradition that comes from South India, going back about 7,000 years. So such a vast span of time, and of course means it's gone through a lot of iterations and changes, and it sort of morphed into Taoism in China a long time ago. It's one of the two contributing factors to Hinduism. So it's, along with the sort of Vedic religion, Hinduism is the kind of blend of Tantra and the Vedic religion from the Caucasus.
Yeah.
It's a part of Buddhism. Buddhism had tantric masters.
Right.
So it's influenced many of the major religious traditions in the world over the centuries. Today, aside from that influence, which you can find bits of in Zen and pretty much everything, there are 4 or 5 what I would call modern schools of Tantra outside India, which are Ananda Marga, the Yogananda school and its offshoots or related schools, the Shivananda school, and the Tibetan Buddhism. which
Okay.
is also a very much school of Tantra. So those are the sort of living tantric traditions that I'm aware of that are active outside of India. If you go to India, you'll find there are more that may not be so well known.
So Kriya Yoga, which is Yogananda's
Yeah.
self-realization organization, they attribute many of the things to Tantra?
Well, whether or not they use that term, that's what they're teaching. Shivananda, he personally said very clearly this is Tantra and it comes from this root, and there's an alignment there. Of course, each has its nuance. The Shivananda school has quite a lot of influence from Hinduism still.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Tibetan Buddhist school is very much influenced by the Tibetan culture and so forth. But at the core of it is definitely a tantric tradition, and especially if you look at the higher practices and the kind of deeper philosophy, when I'm reading the Tibetan Book of Great Liberation, it's almost identical to the core Sanskrit texts of Anandamaga of our school.
I know that you blend mindfulness and Tantra together. Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Sure. So mindfulness, you could say it's another word for concentration.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because it means paying attention to what's going on right now, rather than thinking about what's probably not going to happen tomorrow and what you probably regret happened yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it means being focused. Now that is a core practice in meditation, but meditation is much more than that.
Right.
And also the choice of what you focus on is tremendously important.
Yeah.
You remember yesterday I was talking about the whole neuroplasticity. So the outcome of what you focus on is that it affects your brain directly.
Most definitely.
It actually molds the shape that your brain gradually changes into. So the choice of the object of concentration is critical, and that's a big part of Tantra, what we focus on. So mindfulness is simply focusing. Tantra is, focusing is critical, but let's be careful about what we choose to focus on and how we do that. And there's a whole lot more to it.
Yeah.
So mindfulness is a subset of the spiritual meditation practice.
How do you use meditation to help you as a writer?
There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of this from writers, musicians, creative people, scientists, that going to a quiet place is the place where you find ideas.
Right.
And even most people, when they're grappling with an idea, they can't solve a problem, if they leave it for a while, go home, go to sleep, wake up, often the solution pops into their heads in the shower, or when they're just walking along the road or somewhere quiet, because we need the intellect to shut down pretty much, or to quieten down, so that we can see what's happening deeper, and the creative ideas come from a deeper place. As far as research goes, it's pretty hard to measure creativity, but there are attempts, and psychologists have been playing with it for years. And there is a really good study from Leiden University in Holland, where they concluded that meditation, certain types of meditation, definitely stimulate creativity.
Dada, talk about your novel, Real Dragons Don't Cry.
So this is a bit of a departure from writing a book about meditation, right? Though my dragon does meditate for a little bit. He's not very good at it, but
really?
he tries.
A meditating dragon?
Well, yeah, a little sometimes.
A yogi dragon?
I've wanted to write a fantasy novel ever since I was 7, I think. Probably since I read the Narnia books and The Hobbit, and I always thought, I'd love to create a world like that. And it took me a really long time to get around to it. But last year I published the first of what is a planned series of 5 books, and it's a fantasy comedy, so it mixes genres, and I picked that for a number of reasons. I didn't want to write another pale imitation of Tolkien, which all too many fantasy novels seem to be, because I'm a great admirer of Tolkien, and I would hate people to think of me like that I was sort of trying to do what he did, but nowhere near as good. So I thought I'm going to avoid that altogether and write a fantasy comedy, because one thing Tolkien was not good at is writing jokes.
And that's your style.
There are a couple of jokes in Lord of the Rings, and they're not very fun. So it's a story about an alien who's a student at college on his planet, and he's going to a college where they train saints, messiahs, and world saviors.
Wow.
So when he's still a student, he's sent as an emissary to the Earth in the 14th century, and his mission is to find the last lost seed of the microvita tree in the ruins of Atlantis.
Wow.
And Atlantis was, according to this story, the sort of first attempt at creating a spiritual civilization on Earth. But it failed. And they, while it was developing, they created the dragons. And so the dragons come from Atlantis. So he has to track down the last of the dragons from Atlantis and persuade this man-eating monster to help him find Atlantis.
He sounds like a sensitive dragon, because is he the one that's trying not to cry? It sounds like somebody's not trying to cry.
The dragon reforms during the story.
Okay.
Yeah, he becomes a vegetarian, but he's struggling with it.
The dragon becomes a vegetarian.
Well, he kind of likes eating people, but he understands it's not good for his health, and and then he does a little meditation. He becomes more philosophical. He writes really bad poetry.
Wow, we have to get to know. What's the dragon's name?
Joe.
Joe.
And the creator of the dragons deliberately gave them very ordinary names, because he didn't want them to get too egotistical, because they're so wise and powerful and strong. He thought, let's give them very basic, working class names, so that they don't get too swell-headed just because they're dragons.
If people want to learn meditation from you, how should they contact you?
I have a website, of course, themonkdude.com. And I have another website, themonkdudespeaks.com. So that's really for my more professional audiences. I'm doing quite a lot of work speaking at corporations and teaching meditation for different, especially tech companies, because I live in Silicon Valley.
Where have you spoken at?
Well, brand names: Google, Facebook, Intel, Cisco, because they're all near where I live. And
Cool.
I know lots of people in the area, and I've been lucky enough to be invited to teach at some of those places. And now I'm working with other, different kind of companies that they find that there's a need for the sort of outcomes that you get from meditation for their staff. And people need to be less stressed, they need to be more focused. I'm developing a special workshop on creativity and innovation, which is another outcome of meditation practice.
You have been meditating now for 30 plus years, 40 years?
Yeah, more than 40 years.
I've
been a teacher for about 36, 37.
Okay. So maybe you can share a little bit with us about, what transformations have you seen in your life? What are what's that like to have meditated for about 40 years?
Well, the changes that I've felt subjectively, I'm a lot happier. That's the most obvious.
You get increasingly happier?
Yeah, it gets better. Definitely. It's not that I was a miserable person, but the kind of ups and downs. I was an emotional person, and I'm still emotional, but I have more control of my emotions. So I'm not at the mercy, especially of the sort of darker emotions, which I used to be to some degree. And so definitely there's this, over time, there's this definite increase in the sort of what they call the baseline of happiness. And this is something that's been borne out by research, actually, amongst meditators, that this is
the 10%?
A common outcome. Well, it can be more than 10%.
thing?
Well, not necessarily, there's not a figure on it. That's a book called 10% Happier. He was just coining that as an idea. But many meditators experience this, an increase in this sort of feeling of happiness. Another big outcome for me was, especially right early on, I felt that I was tapping into the source of creative ideas and imagination within myself. And as a musician and a writer, and that for me, it was great. It was a gold mine.
What would you have done with all this creative energy you have if you didn't have this path?
I would have created a mess, I'm sure, probably of my life, and probably you see so many creative people that have problems with addiction, with just psychological problems, depression, and all these kind of things. And though I started meditating when I was 19, so fortunately those things didn't really have a chance to develop in me. I could see the potential that I could have been had a far less happy, productive, fruitful time in my little time here on Earth, and done far less for other people. I think that what I've been able to teach people has helped them. I've seen this come to other people as well, whom I've been able to guide. So that's very satisfying.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dada. Thanks for
a
taking
lot.
the time. Thanks for writing. Well, we'll see you soon.
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Baba Namo Kevala, Baba Namo Kevala.